Hello to our audience around the world. Thanks for joining us today for a webinar on the evolution of mobile travel, where to invest next. Today's webinar is presented by MTT, which is part of Travelport Digital. I'm Sean O'Neill, editor of Tnooz in the Philadelphia area. I'm joined by Gene Quinn, CEO of Tnooz in Connecticut. You'll be hearing from our presenters very shortly. Just a few bits of housekeeping. 3 things. First, within about a day's time, Tnooz will email you a video replay of today's webinar. You will also get the slides by email. You can share those slides with your colleagues. We have a lot of information we've packed in today. There'll be a lot of detailed slides, so you probably will want to go back after the presentation to double check some of the details. Second, we will have a question and answer session at the end. When you have a question at any point today, please use the box in your GoToWebinar dashboard. Under questions, just type in your questions. I'll read the questions to the moderator, to our panelists, and they will answer them. You can put some in as early as now if you like. Our third and last thing is that we'll be asking a few poll questions of the audience today. Your answers will help us to adjust our presentation to better match who is listening in. So please answer the questions using our GoToWebinar tool. Our first poll, as you see on the screen, is where are you located? These results will probably vary a bit given the time difference, but are you in North America, Europe, Latin America, or Asia Pacific? It looks like about half of you are joining us from North America and about 42% from Europe, with a few in Latin America and Asia Pacific. Thank you, wherever you are in the world, for taking the time to listen today. We promise to make it worth your while. One more question before we start. We would like to know what business segment you are in. I'm expecting a lot of airlines and TMCs today, given the nature of the talk. So if you could select one of the following, please. Are you an airline or another supplier? Are you a travel management company, a travel agency, or corporate buyer? Or are you a tech provider, consultant, or professional services, or other? It looks like about a third of you are TMCs or travel agencies. About half are tech providers and consultants. 5% are airlines, and another 5% are other suppliers. So thank you, all of you. We will take this into account as we do the presentation today, when we give you a 5-part roadmap to help you map your mobile strategy against a proven methodology. After today, you'll come away with a practical, actionable set of tips to deliver the best mobile experience and to achieve your business objectives. Leading our presentation today is Brendan Burke, digital consultant, MTT. He's joining us from Dublin. You'll also hear from Ken Augustine, client partner, MTT. He's calling in from New York City today. I now turn the presentation over to Brendan.
Thanks, Sean. Hello, everybody. So moving on to the next slide. Before we get into the detail of the evolution in mobile framework, let's take a moment to look at where we stand today when it comes to mobile and travel. Mobile travel has come a long way in less than 10 years. From a time when airlines experimented with WAP technology and all of its associated limitations, right through to the release of the iPhone and the App Store, we've seen steady innovation and experimentation. But in the last number of years, the pace of innovation has accelerated quite considerably. Given where we are today, it's really incredible to think that it's less than 10 years since the launch of the iPhone. Next slide, please. This innovation has led to a number of trends that we've seen in the market in the past 12 months or so. The first one is removing friction. This is all about the end of mobile field filling. Saved profiles in booking flows, passport scanning during check-in, and multiple mobile payment options are all making these once traditional drop-off points completely disappear. The second is multi-platform. Today's connected traveler lives in a multi-screen world. So thinking about mobile alone now is actually tunnel vision, as apps are increasingly becoming experiences that live across multiple touch points, not just mobile. The next trend is mobile payments. The smarter businesses are thinking wider than just Apple Pay. Samsung Pay is expanding, Android Pay is alive in the US, UK, Australia, and Singapore, and PayPal One Touch is growing in popularity, and Amazon Pay is also rolling out. Then we come to context and location. The app home screen, as we've known it, is now dead. Contextual information about a passenger's journey and the next leg of their journey is becoming the new home screen. When it comes to specific TMC trends, there's a lot of attention being paid to virtual agents. And given world events of the past year, there's a renewed interest in duty of care for business travelers and an ability to use mobile communication platforms to provide even basic updates of those in areas where there's been terrorism, extreme weather, or any major local event or occurrence. The next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about where the evolution of mobile concept came from, or EVOM as we call it. Having worked with airlines and TMCs for the past 11 years, we've helped these businesses to navigate their way through their evolution on mobile. There's no one set way to navigate EVOM, as every business begins their journey into mobile in a slightly different way. Often the starting point is dictated by the different focus of each airline. Operations, brand, cost savings, revenue, and innovation are all mobile drivers for airlines. EVOM is also a benchmarking tool designed to help airlines and TMCs to understand where they stand versus their competitors on the 5 key pillars, which we'll discuss shortly. When these businesses understand their position, they can more intelligently plan future mobile development activity in order to improve their position on each pillar. Next slide, please. So as I said, there's a number of pillars in the mobile evolution of airlines and TMCs. And as I said, we'll also talk through each one in depth in a moment. It's important to know this evolution is not necessarily linear. Airlines and TMCs take different paths based on their own priorities. Some begin with full solutions, some build from the ground up over many years. However, each stage must be complete to become a market leader, a true mobile-first brand. Next slide, please. And this is how a plotted EVOM could look, with each airline or TMC plotted against their competitors on a scale of 1 to 5. Now, this won't make so much sense now, but we'll revisit this once we've gone through each of the pillars in detail. The featured examples we'll show you on the coming slides are not meant to be exhaustive. They aren't the only elements that can fill each pillar. We just want to show you an example of some of the features that these pillars represent. Now I'll hand back to Sean for our next poll.
Yes, everyone. If you could please participate in this poll question about which pillar do you most associate with your mobile strategy today? Is it foundation, revenue, acquisition and engagement, owning the traveler, or mobile first? Thank you for participating. It looks like about a third of you feel like owning the traveler is where you're at. About a quarter of you are at acquisition and engagement. 15% say foundation, 11% say revenue, and 21% say mobile first. Brendan, do those results sort of line up with your expectations, or are they a bit surprising to you?
Broadly, yes. I mean, sometimes we would see revenue slightly higher, but perhaps many of the attendees feel that that's an area that they've nailed to quite a large degree. But often we would see owning the traveler appear as the highest. It tends to be a key for a lot of travel businesses because of all the other distractions that travelers engage with during their travel and journey process, or the people who are trying to own the traveler. So often we see that appear quite highly. Again, acquisition and engagement is generally when we see that's relatively popular, particularly in engagement, how you can constantly engage a traveler beyond simply downloading and installing the app on an ongoing basis. And then obviously mobile first is something that many businesses are constantly striving for. So broadly, I would say it's in line with what we see, but I'd be interested to see how this performs versus the poll we have later on, which is of a similar nature.
Okay, fantastic. Back over to you, Brendan.
So actually, this is Ken. No, that's okay. This is Ken. So we're going to talk a little bit about the foundation layer here, which we consider at MTT to be the minimum requirement for travel companies that are wanting to produce a mobile app. So next slide, please. We'll get into that. So for travel management companies, what foundational level means is delivering itinerary services for current and past trips in the most convenient, the most elegant way that's possible. It includes ensuring that that service spans multiple platforms so that you can reach users where they live and breathe. For airlines, this means the ability to search and book flights, seeing those itineraries, including when it's in an offline state, and airlines at this stage should be delivering boarding passes and or status for flights that are booked. But really, with this stage, it's about getting the basics right and meeting minimum expectation for your users' expectations. So this, however, is much easier said than it is achieved. Simplicity, along with beautiful design, is essential, but it's often very challenging. The price of poor experience across foundation elements can be very, very expensive. Next slide, please. So here are some examples, and you may need to click once again. There we go. When things can get very painful, nobody wants to launch a particularly poor performing app, but what's even more important is continually reevaluating the foundation for your application and doing it with fresh eyes. Because even when you have fantastic ratings in the beginning upon first launch, your users can become especially frustrated if the latest release fails to live up to expectations and fails to deliver a great user experience. Next slide, please. So we really only get one chance to make a first impression with travelers. If your app does not perform brilliantly, they'll quickly move on to something that they feel gives them more benefit. And it can be very, very difficult to get these potential users back. Executing at this foundational level is essential. Next slide, please. So after all, this is a very good example of which app would you choose to keep. For TMCs, there's a lot of choices out there for itinerary providers. And for airlines, there's a lot of choices out there for their experiences they use for flights. It's key to provide something that is visually appealing and makes it as easy as possible for travelers to use. This is an area that to be able to surprise and delight travelers. Next slide, please. And in that sense, it's not enough to measure just how many downloads, but actually how users are adopting the app. BCD Travel's TripSource is a very, very good example of an itinerary app that is well accepted by users due to the high amount of emphasis that it is put on user experience and on design. The ultimate success metric for them is that they have a tremendously high amount of users that continue to come back to the app and use it. That's an exceptional amount of loyalty that they can build. Next slide, please. So the scope for a solid foundation will continue to increase over time because travelers' minimum expectations based on the applications that are on the market have grown over time. Several years ago, emailing your invoice to populate a mobile app itinerary was seen as quite a premium feature. But over time, this feature and the ability to scrape an itinerary from email or check within a user's inbox has come to be seen something that is in most every itinerary app. And therefore, it is moving much more towards a foundational layer of app development. Next slide, please. So likewise, for airlines, check-in, status, booking are now seen as something that is in nearly every airline app choice for users. They are the foundation of what airlines need to be able to provide at this level. Next slide, please. So the takeaway here from an MTT perspective is that the price of entry into the digital space for any travel company is this foundational layer. Users expect great value and utility in their app, and they will get that value somewhere. Airlines and TMCs need to ensure that their app impresses travelers from the moment a user downloads and registers for it. Without that experience, the investment that these travel companies are making is sure to be wasted. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's move on to the revenue pillar. Once the foundations are in place, driving revenue comes sharply into focus for most travel businesses. And this is a slightly different focus for both airlines and for TMCs. Next slide, please. When it comes to revenue, airlines need to ensure that cross-sell and upsell opportunities are being executed correctly throughout the entire passenger journey. This means presenting ancillary options at the right time across multiple touchpoints. Where appropriate, targeted push messaging should also be used to drive maximum revenue potential. Next slide, please. Revenue for TMCs means multiple things. It's about how TMCs can differentiate and provide stickiness for clients, how to get more bookings overall, how to decrease abandonment rate, and how to maximize commission. And delivering all of this while supporting the tenets of the corporate travel policy. This represents challenges, but also opportunities for TMCs. Next slide, please. TMCs should start in places that really speak to the travel buyer. An ability for the travel program to push contextual messages to travelers at the right time is critical to cost savings, policy adherence, and risk avoidance, as well as putting the travel manager themselves into a strong position of credibility. Because the message only goes to the right traveler and only when they need it, it has a significantly better chance to be acted upon, and obviously a much better chance than a paragraph that sits at the bottom of an itinerary email. With real savings on the line, this is something that corporates will pay for. Next slide, please. As TMCs develop self-service purchase options for travelers, special attention needs to be given to how this booking flow looks. Currently, the very best apps for booking travel do a great job of reducing the steps that have to be taken in the decision process. Integrating traveler profiles and having client-specific configurations are critical to success for booking for TMCs. Next slide, please. When it comes to revenue for airlines, it's all about leveraging the mobile offering to contextually drive the greatest revenues. It's not about overloading app flows with every possible ancillary, but understanding when offering an additional ancillary makes sense. Push messaging is a great way to do this, and our clients have seen very strong responses to push messaging campaigns, with in some cases over 50% increases in mobile revenues on a given day. Next slide, please. So you don't need to just take our words for the importance of revenue. Let's look at some stats that highlight the growing importance of revenue on mobile. If you still need some proof as to how valuable the mobile corporate booking channel is, just keep in mind that a quarter of corporate travel bookings will be made via mobile by next year. A recent CETA report shows that airlines are going to respond to the increasing move to mobile by offering a much wider range of services to their passengers. And Tnooz reported earlier this year that 51% of travelers prefer to book on a mobile device. When it comes to maximizing conversion, the native app experience is extremely important. Apps accounted for 57% of travel bookings in Q1 2016, highlighting their importance over mobile web when it comes to driving conversions. Next slide, please. So our takeouts from the revenue pillar. It's really all about execution. Get that right, and the rewards will surely follow. Push messaging, when used correctly, is a great tool in your armory. Successfully driving revenue and ROI can also justify greater investment in some of the other pillars that we've discussed and will discuss today. Next slide, please. So moving on to the third pillar, which is acquisition and engagement. This is all about, obviously, the importance of acquiring and keeping users. Next slide. So as I said, this pillar is all about acquiring users on an ongoing basis, knowing your customer and driving continual engagement. Often most, if not all, of the focus of a mobile project is on building and maintaining the app itself, with little attention given to strategic marketing. Similarly, building an app that knows and learns as much as possible about its users is essential to driving repeat usage. Next slide, please. Marketing is an obvious requirement to drive downloads, and one of the most basic elements is clear, SEO-friendly, on-site information that explains the features and benefits of your app. Some strong examples here are shown from the likes of Etihad and BCD, but it's amazing how many businesses don't follow this approach. Next slide, please. And it's important to also try new things to drive the adoption of new features, as these examples from EasyJet and BCD demonstrate. EasyJet ran an incentivized mobile booking promotion around their integration of Apple Pay, and BCD regularly promote usage of their app with specific Tripster emails. Next slide. Video is a great way to communicate the benefits of your app. Video content can be used for promotional purposes on the app stores, as part of app install ad campaigns, and on your site and social media profiles. Different channels and use cases will require different types and lengths of video, but video is always a solid investment when it comes to app promotion. Next slide, please. One of the best forms of marketing on the App Store is simply organic. By building a popular app and by embracing and innovating with the latest OS features, you can receive promotion that money simply can't buy. At MTT, we've been successful with that approach over a number of years, as the figures here show. Next slide, please. So, our takeaways on this pillar. App marketing is often not planned very well, if at all. Whether it's launch activity or ongoing engagement, planning is simply critical. Knowing your customer is key, but demonstrating to them that you know them is even more important. This pillar is crucial because in many ways it drives all of the rest. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks, Brendan. So I know that on the poll earlier, we had a lot of responses around owning the traveler. Let's take some time to talk about what that really means for both TMCs and for airlines. Next slide, please. There is a virtual sea of mobile apps out there right now for travel. Each and every one of them is working extremely hard to get your traveler's attention. So if you don't own the traveler for all of their needs, certainly someone else will do that. Airlines need to provide services that go beyond booking flights and offer other areas of support during the journey. TMCs need to ensure that they are offering all areas of the journey as best they can and making sure that those services are consistent across all channels and even innovating in some of those spaces. Next slide, please. So when you get right down to it, this is indeed very much what travelers want. They want to have pervasive, consistent service that is delivered to their phone when they need it most. The more relevant information that you make available to travelers, the more valuable that traveler will find your mobile app to be. Next slide, please. And by delivering this information in a very contextual, smart fashion, airlines and TMCs can find ways to remove pain for travelers and, in fact, increase customer satisfaction that's aimed at their brand. We see this in the examples on screen, flight status and baggage carousel, but it's also with check-in reminders, relevant policy alerts, and another of other items that are during the journey. Next slide, please. It's not just about day of travel information, or in the case of airlines, onboard entertainment. Airlines and TMCs can also find ways to inspire travelers. In this example, just as Singapore Airlines has done with their destination content that's on their iPad app. Next slide, please. So one place we can discuss this is Google, because they are certainly a prime example of trying to get ownership of your traveler. Google Destinations is what they're doing for shopping. It populates flights or hotels into your search results when you search for a regional location with the word vacation or destination behind that search. Google now simplifies the day of travel in a way that they are now using leave for the airport push notifications, leave for the airport now, weather cards, currency, flight status, photo spots nearby. There's now up to 10 of their cards, of their 30 that are available, that are now related specifically to travel. And just released, Google Trips looks to serve all of your destination needs. So this is sort of everything that you want in a basic itinerary service, plus an interesting destination guide. Of course, these are all done in a very smart fashion while using the data that Google has at its fingertips. We expect to see this functionality rolled up at some point in the future as they continue development of all of them. And all of these efforts are being made by Google to own your traveler with no traditional brand in sight. Next slide, please. So one area that TMCs would be really wise, therefore, not to forget is their greatest asset, which are agents. They are a stranded traveler's greatest hero, a confused traveler's best guide. So the challenge for TMCs is to bring repeatable functions to the mobile, digital, self-service layer and leave the consultative work in the hands of the veteran agent where they can really add the most value. Next slide, please. In this way, mobile can be used to leverage and to amplify what agents can bring to the table. When airlines and TMCs can effectively bring useful technology into the hands of travelers, they can create a competitive advantage for themselves. Users want self-service, and it reduces the cost for the organization at the same time while increasing customer service. Next slide. And without a doubt, all the press around bots and virtual agents make that poised to sort of take this idea to the next level. As this area of technology continues to get more investment, more and more intelligence goes into the user experience, the ability to cross-sell those travelers, the ability to utilize their profiles for better conversion rates, and still strategic content, all while reducing those operational costs that we talked about. There is no doubt that there is opportunity in this space to take a market-leading position. Next slide, please. So MTT's takeaway for owning the traveler is that it's really essential to take control of this space. Look for new possibilities within the traveler journey to add value. Make sure that it's added at all channels of service to avoid any user confusion and improve the experience overall. If you can do this well, if this is something that you can nail, you can gain travelers' trust and revenue will follow. Next slide, please. So we're going to move to the mobile first pillar, and I saw a lot of people in the poll around that as well. We're going to talk about what that means from an MTT perspective as well. Next slide, please. MTT thinks of mobile first as your organization's ability to be creative and forward-thinking, how to utilize what can be developed at a digital level to forward the overall customer service of your organization. It's very much a mindset to delight travelers through mobile innovation. Next slide, please. Some airlines, such as Singapore, are using mobile expressively to elevate their in-flight entertainment offerings or to extend elements of their mobile app to wearables, such as EasyJet also is doing that. In other cases, it's simply taking advantage of new operating system technologies that are built in, Apple Pay was one of those examples that was mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. There's an opportunity around this for itinerary apps. They have been slow to pick up on leveraging some of these technologies. And TMC should heavily consider this, whether it's utilizing predictive mapping technology, using Siri to deep link into an app with iOS 10, or using fingerprint technology as an added security measure. These are areas that can allow for some differentiation in the mobile app space. Next slide, please. One area that needs to get special consideration as well is the area of payment as it revolves around mobile. So as shown a couple slides ago, Apple Pay and Google Pay also are no-brainers to make the payment process as seamless as possible. If corporates have third-party profile systems for their travelers, as most do, integrating them into your mobile app platform is also a key element of allowing a very smooth booking flow. Even better would be an ability to integrate virtual credit cards for corporate travel programs, allowing corporate travelers to book the business travel on the device that is most relevant to them. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to lead to here is our ability to surprise and delight your travelers through their mobile device. Use the camera to upload passport information, or take a picture to remember where their car is parked at the airport. Use voice control to make test requests to agents. But above all, take advantage of this unique platform that is mobile right now. Next slide, please. So the MTT take, we know that this is not an easy task that's in front of us. Some of us were not necessarily born into the mobile era rather. So it's easier for us typically to visualize the work that has to be done in some of the other pillars. But this is a way for travel companies to truly add new and innovative value to their travelers. As it says on screen here, it's the ultimate goal. So take steps to get your organization, your division, your team on a path to get there. Set goals, create deadlines, but above all, think mobile first. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we've talked through each of the 5 pillars of EVOM in quite a bit of detail there. But what is an EVOM mentality that a business needs to have? Well, an EVOM focused mentality is really all about mindset, and your business thinking and structures need to be in place to deliver on this. You need to be constantly analyzing the market and your competitors. For some businesses, changing this mindset can be more challenging than for others. But ultimately, the mobile experience of your customer needs to be at the heart of all that you do in order to deliver on the promise of EVOM. Next slide, please. And here again, just as a reminder, after we've gone through the pillars, is an example of how a plotted evolution of mobile would look, which shows 4 airlines or TMCs, each plotted against their competitors on each pillar. This plotting enables the businesses to assess where they stand themselves and versus their competitive set. Understanding this relative positioning informs mobile strategy and ultimately facilitates decision-making and resource allocation. And now back to Sean for a final poll.
Yes, thank you for that. If everyone could please vote in this final poll on which 2 of the pillars represent your mobile strategy in the next 6 months. Is it foundation, revenue, acquisition and engagement, owning the traveler, mobile first? You can vote for more than one. We remind everyone that you can ask questions using the box on your panel if you have questions about any of the things that are talked about, and we'll forward them along to our presenters. So it looks like about 1 out of 4 of us on the call today are seeing foundation as one of the pillars representing their priority in the next 6 months. 43% say revenue, about a third saying acquisition and engagement, 59% saying owning the traveler, and about a third are mobile first. So that's a big mix. Brendan and Ken, do you feel like that sort of dovetails where you think people are? A lot of the people who will be calling into this are probably very engaged people.
Yeah, absolutely. So to go through them, foundation, again, we'd expect a lot of the audience to have a lot of foundation elements done. So not surprising that that's the lowest of the 5 pillars. Revenue, probably getting a boost from when we first asked the question. So revenue obviously is always a major focus for all travel businesses. Driving ancillary revenue and so on is always key. So absolutely. But again, owning the traveler is coming out strongly. It did the first time around. It's probably even stronger now. And we think that's probably the biggest challenge that we see across the industry, across our clients. I'm really trying to see how they can engage the traveler across every stage of the journey. And I'm not surprised to see that come out so highly. And obviously great to see mobile first there as well. So the ambitions of those on the webinar to really deliver on mobile first and innovative features as part of their mobile strategy. So yeah, great, and pretty much in line with what we would normally see.
Fantastic. Well, back over to you for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, so really just to wrap up a little bit about MTT. So at MTT, we have the largest team of travel specialists in the world, and we use digital and mobile technology to create unique travel experiences and ultimately grow our clients' revenue. So some of the clients that we have, we've built the app for Singapore Airlines, including development of an IFE companion app. We're currently working on the new Aeromexico app, which will be launched later this year. We build and manage multi-award-winning apps for one of the biggest airlines in Europe, EasyJet. We also work with BCD Travel, American Express, Global Business Travel on their mobile apps as well. And in April this year, we were proud to launch the new Etihad Airways app. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Right.
So that's it for the presentation. Thank you all for attending. We hope you found it useful and interesting, and we look forward to taking your questions.
So thanks to everyone who has already asked some questions by typing them into the box there. We've gotten some good ones, but it's not too late to add some questions in there. We have a question from Hunter who is asking, do you have any recommendations on the testing phase of a new app or app update? How can we make sure our app is meeting the various needs of our users?
Yeah, this is Ken. So I think that there's probably a few different questions that are really involved with that. So one is just about ensuring that you're working pretty hard with your users through perhaps user groups or any of your customers very, very closely to ensure that you're kind of rating what features they're really that are really important to them. I think secondarily to that is the first part of the question: how do we test that and make sure that it's well defined as it goes out? So what we have done in the past, and I think which makes good sense, is to have in some cases some test releases, or to ensure that the business, I guess in addition to, is very, very closely related to the development cycle. So it's easy for them to ensure that all of the different use cases are being employed, all of the acceptance criteria that are necessary for the particular features are being incorporated.
Fantastic. Brendan, Mateus is asking, what is your view on new trends such as progressive apps and the instant apps? Do you think this may lead to an end of mobile-specific app as a go-to way for travelers to access content on their mobile devices?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we talk a lot about internally. To deal with them in order, I think definitely progressive web is really interesting as a trend, and it's quite a lot of functionality that mimics that of a native app. However, it hasn't been fully embraced by Apple yet and Safari, so until that happens, it probably has its limitations. So for me, and what I would recommend is to keep an eye on these technologies, and when they get to a point where it looks like the tipping point has arrived in terms of their ability to appeal to all platforms and all users, then they should be looked at. So we keep a close eye on progressive web here, and obviously it's developing all the time. In terms of instant apps, again, similar. I think there's positives and negatives to instant apps. The first is that it certainly opens yourself to a wider audience by allowing users to access app content in a modularized format without downloading the app. I think that certainly has its benefits. However, those users never actually install the app, therefore tracking and analytics and follow-ups are more difficult. So again, I think it's a trend that needs to be kept an eye on in terms of that kind of out-of-app experience. So that's what we're advising our clients to do. But right now, I wouldn't be jumping into either of those as major investments. Perhaps a test methodology could be taken, as we've seen some players in the travel industry do. But certainly they're trends worth keeping an eye on, but I don't think they're perfect yet in terms of how they can be executed upon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brendan. Ken, we have a question from Marilyn. Are you seeing changes to bookings now taking place via corporate booking tools on mobile, such as flight changes? The context is that some travel managers are nervous about travelers making changes via mobile rather than through the TMC, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. So I think that we haven't seen that fully come to fruition yet, but I can see where it potentially is on the horizon. And most of that comes out of travelers' expectations around what they see in the shopping experience. So the challenges that have to be met as we see this come to bear is that ability to mix in some of the things that I think Marilyn is likely concerned about in terms of how do we ensure that these travelers are still working within policy, that they're giving the correct reasoning or whatever that might be for a change in their flight that's a return flight or even one that's prior booked that they have not started yet. So there is a lot of work to be done in that area, but I think that's also a place where there's a lot of innovation that can come, because should you be able to handle some of those concerns, that would absolutely be something that would be of extremely high value to travelers.
Okay, Ken, and we have a follow-up question to the question that Brendan sort of addressed in a sort of a different way, but specific to TMCs. Can you compare or contrast the advantages for a TMC that's in one of the early stages of the model, an early stage of developing a mobile strategy? Can you compare and contrast the advantages of using apps versus, responsive web design, HTML5?
Yeah, so I think, and we get asked this question a lot as well. So I think that there's a couple things that really need to be thought through because they each have their own sort of pros and cons. With responsive web design, clearly you can get something out to market much faster. Clearly it's something that is a little bit less expensive in that regard. However, typically most studies are showing that if you want adoption of an app and you want return use to the app, it's something that you really want a lot of native app sort of development in. So there's a lot of variance of that. And again, we get asked that question a lot, and we've talked about it a lot internally as well. So it's not necessarily just responsive web or native app, but there's a lot of technologies around wrapping responsive web inside of a native app sort of environment. The point is for us is that you're not sacrificing user experience for any of that, because that's what effectively you want to do in those early stages in order to be able to do as much as you can to get that adoption.
And just as a quick follow-up to that as well, if in terms of booking and enabling booking via native versus mobile web, the stats out there would seem to indicate that conversion is higher with a better native user experience. Criteo have released a couple of reports recently showing the 57% of bookings in travel are on native apps. And a recent report from mobile retail was that the conversion rate's 3 times higher for apps versus mobile web. So I think those considerations should be made when perhaps looking at mobile web or responsive as a slightly more cost-effective option for development. In the long run, the lower conversion rates can actually be counterproductive to that thinking.
I agree. And some of the feature sets that we're talking about, the expectation is that they're available offline, and that really suggests a need for native development.
Okay. Brendan, Mark is asking, how will NDC play into mobile? NDC is the new distribution capability concept that is IATA's sort of new technical standards for distributing content.
Yeah, I think that's something that everyone's working out at the moment. It's something that we're looking at internally. We don't have any live projects in terms of looking at it, but it's something that we're playing around with in terms of how it could work. So I think it remains to be seen. I think the challenges with it that people see widely in the market will also exist in mobile. So in terms of a unique mobile angle to it, there aren't any right now. I think it's going to be a broader challenge, but it's something that we're certainly looking at and we keep an eye on over the next period of time.
And a question for you, Ken. Timothy is asking, how can a TMC be different from the airline GDS services that are already accessible by the consumer? And this is sort of dovetails with something that I often hear when I'm at conferences and events and talking to TMCs and corporate managers, is that they feel a bit outgunned by the services that are pushed by the airlines and GDSs.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there's a challenge at all levels, whether it be airlines, GDSs, some of the other big players, or even Google that we talked about in here. So one of the things that maybe is a little bit inferred in some of the things that we talk about, but that I think we want to continue to push on, is that although we definitely want TMCs to be seen as the provider of some of the technology for their travelers in general, or their clients as well, there is a large part of what they can offer through that mobile that has to be synthesized with the service that they can bring. So I think this is a really good question, because the challenge is definitely out there, but the ability of a TMC to be able to morph and evolve and synthesize some of the unique services that they can provide that they've done historically through agents and combine that with mobile is the target that we really need to look at here. And that's something that TMCs have been very successful at doing that over and over.
Okay, well, Timothy is pushing back a little bit on that, because one of the concepts is that labor per transaction is one of the biggest costs for both retail travel agencies and TMCs. And so what their real goal, and you talked a bit about this, is that one of the things mobile tech can do, it can reduce, it can amplify and leverage what agents can do in order to make their time more efficient. But there is this trade-off in trying to make sure that the money spent on investing is going to have a payoff in efficiency, so that the balance sheet's going to balance out. Is there sort of some way that you can sort of make the sale about why investing in an app or a mobile site, when there's already so much plentiful in the market, why it's really going to pay off?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different things to consider in that realm, and again, it's a great question, because for some TMCs, that is going to be a very specific payoff, as Timothy mentions, in terms of what's my cost per transaction that I'm reducing, and how is that being offloaded by mobile and the investment that I'm putting in mobile. There are others who simply want to make sure that their brand is front and center, and that it's something that is in that sense of owning the traveler, that that investment, albeit a little bit more than they would have in the past, is something that they're using to actually make sure that their brand is a touch point to those travelers that they haven't had in the past. And then there's still others that are looking forward into the future and talking about, what that might mean in terms of booking or other pieces of services that they can provide to their corporates via corporate messaging, as we mentioned in there, or other services as well. So depending on your own scope of services that you want to put in there, some of that can be justified by a ROI for revenue. Some of it can be done through cost savings. and some of it can be done through other justifications that don't exactly equate to revenue when you think of brand and other pieces. So how that relates to you is a little bit up to your own TMC as a culture, but that's something that we've been able to do in the past for others.
Okay. Brendan, when does mobile cease to be a distribution channel and become something else as part of the ecosystem of searching, shopping, buying, traveling?
That's an interesting question, and I think it goes back to kind of what we were touching on in terms of the owning the traveler concept. So yes, mobile is a distribution channel, a revenue channel for both core products and for ancillaries. But thinking bigger than that, there is the opportunity to provide services and functionality that go beyond that in terms of providing the best experience possible beyond just booking. So day of travel notifications and updates to help users get through the airport, to know where to check in, to find their bags, to find their way around an airport, destination guides, on board, IFE, companion solutions. There's a whole range of pieces of functionality that can be used from the inspiration stage right through to the destination stage. And I hope that came across when we were talking today, that obviously revenue is a major part of everything we talk about for EVOM, but that the other pillars, particularly owning the traveler, but also engagement and mobile first, are about surprising and delighting and adding value and utility beyond simply revenue. And I think mobile is really getting there now, but it still has a bit of a way to go.
Thank you for that. This is a call out to our audience. This is your last chance to ask some questions. Brendan, we have a couple of rapid fire questions here. This is the rapid fire section of our day. What about which GDSs can work with MTT? Obviously, MTT is part of Travelport Digital. If you could clear up for people, what GDSs do you work with?
We can approach a project to look at any GDS.
So for Joy, who's asking this, any GDS you can approach a project on?
Yeah.
Okay. Ignacio is asking, is there a decision about whether to invest just in Android or an iOS, or are there other systems as necessary to do Windows, etc.?
It varies from market to market and geographically. Obviously, Android and iOS dominate in most regions, or a lot of regions. But between the two, that does vary. So there's a number of factors to look at. There's adoption of various handsets and iOS platforms in various geographies. I'm not sure where the question is coming from, but also in terms of revenue, the revenue that gets generated from users of certain handsets, or a platform. So you might find in some markets that Android is extremely popular. However, 70% of the revenue is driven by those who have iOS handsets, or devices. So there's two broad considerations: the popularity of the handsets in the region, and the profile of those who are spending in the region and what devices they use.
Hey, Brendan, can I add a third? The other one is depending on what platforms you're looking at, and Windows or other. I mean, several years ago we were still looking at BlackBerry as a platform, and the cost of that development can also sometimes be a factor depending on what platform you're discussing.
Okay. App installs via Facebook. Facebook has sort of a little tool that enables, you pay for as a service to enable people to click to instantly download. Is that something to consider?
Yes. Facebook's probably got the greatest targeting capabilities of any platform out there when you're advertising, whether that's for app installs or anything else, quite frankly. So if you want to drive targeted installs, it is something to consider. There's lots of other both owned and paid channels that you can use to drive your app install. So I think it should form one part of what you're doing in terms of driving installs. And I also think it's very important to pay close attention to the cost per install, but also the cost of lifetime value of a user that you get from Facebook, to see if it pays off versus other channels. So there's lots of tools you can use, the likes of AppsFlyer, to track the attribution, track the source of a campaign, track the value of a customer or a passenger, whatever you want to call it, right through to sale on an ongoing basis in terms of lifetime. So in summary, yes, it's a channel that should be looked at, but it should be measured very closely and measured in comparison with other channels that you're using.
Okay. Earlier in the talk, there was a talk about minimum passenger expectations and what's required at the foundational level. And later in the talk, you mentioned about owning the traveler as one of the hardest challenges at every stage of the journey, particularly given the other on-demand apps that are competitive. Is there a summary point here of something that you feel like people need to know when they're doing their stages in order to be able to help quote unquote own the traveler? Is there sort of an actionable specific example of what should be included?
I think in terms of relating that back to the concept of the evolution of mobile, it is going to vary depending on the particular business. So the pillars that need to be focused on the most will very much be dependent on how they plot themselves currently and versus their competitors. So that's to start off with. So that will dictate what pillars perhaps they want to focus on the most. In terms of owning the traveler, I think what you need to do is sit back and look at the entire traveler journey from start to finish and think of the areas where you can add value and utility to a user's journey. And then plot against that what needs to be done to add that value. So whether that's at inspiration stage, adding a destination guide or companion apps on board, or day of travel help around the airport, whatever it might be, but the areas that you feel that will really add value to your customers and will appeal to your customers, target those stages of the journey and focus on those first.
Fantastic. Well, time is a factor, so we have to wrap up today's webinar. For all of our audience members, you will receive a video replay of today's webinar by email within about 24 hours. You will also get the slides. We've been asked a couple of times, will we be distributing the results of the polls along with the slides? And the answer is yes. You will get to see the poll results and all the slides and be able to share those with your colleagues to get buy-in for future decisions. You saw the email addresses of the colleagues. We will pass along any additional questions that we weren't able to get to during this session to them. We would like to thank you again for joining us. We'd like to thank our fabulous panelists, and we hope everyone has a happy Friday tomorrow.